Thanks everyone for joining us. Very excited to talk about this topic, volunteerism in the sort of the remote world that we're all in now. Really excited to have Rebecca joining us. She's the co-founder and CEO at Inqli, but I'm actually going to turn it over to her to make a proper introduction because she can tell you all about the amazing things she's done over the years and why she can talk about this product. And myself, as you all know, if you've joined these webinars before, I'm the head of people over here at Guusto. And it is my pleasure to run these webinars and hopefully provide a little bit of extra knowledge and skills and things for your HR people toolbox through these webinars. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Rebecca because she's the expert here.
Thank you, Noah. It's so awesome to be here. And yeah, as you know, I've spent a long time studying the space of volunteerism, and predominantly so that I could solve a challenge for learners all over the world. It's a real challenge to connect to people in industry and learn about careers and your next steps and education and all the opportunities that are available to you. And equitable access is a real problem. And so I went looking for a solution, and virtual volunteerism is in fact that solution of how we can connect learners all over the world to people in the workplace in any number of fields and industries and jobs and roles as they change and evolve. And mentorship through virtual volunteerism is a fabulous vehicle to equitably connect learners all over the world to these kinds of opportunities to learn about industry and learn about careers. So that's what Inqli is doing, and we're a startup and we're building and growing as we speak. And I'm excited to be here and talk about this topic because I have spent a long time talking to people in the workforce and really understanding this problem from the lens of businesses of all different sizes. So I'm excited to share what I've learned.
Awesome. I'm really excited to learn, and I think everyone who's sort of joining us is also very excited to learn. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we're not just a couple of little bubbles. We're not going to do a presentation today. Rebecca and I are just going to have a conversation. I think with such a topic where there's a lot of nuances and a lot of different things, I think this style of webinar, we talked about it. We talked about how we wanted to run this, and this is probably the best way that we can run it to get the information that we think is the most important across. And so, Rebecca, I'd love to hear just Inqli's working with a lot of great clients. You're working with a lot of great things. How are you empowering people? How are other organizations empowering their people to volunteer when we're all remote or in hybrid environments? What's going on here? What is this new thing that we're all doing or should be doing?
What is this? Yeah, it's a crazy world we're living in, and organizations all over the world, big and small, are tackling this challenge because like all the challenges we're all facing with remote work is staying connected to each other, staying connected to the causes that we care about as companies and as individuals. And companies all over the world are really looking at different solutions in this space. And anyone who's been paying attention to this space for a long time, we've had access to, what we call CSR platforms. And so they're also leaders in this space, looking to them for experience as well. There's a lot of large companies that have been, working towards this virtual future because they've had distributed workforces for a lot longer. So there's been a lot to learn from that space. But what I find really fascinating is in talking to smaller organizations and education institutions, people are getting really creative about how they not only connect their organization's purpose to volunteerism, but how they're involving their people in that. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how big your team is, really understanding who's on your team, the diverse skills and experience they have, and how that can be used to translate into really engaging volunteerism programs and experiences is easier said than done in this remote world. So I always say step one is talk to your people. I think that's the step one of pretty much every you want to engage people, talk to them. So that's where it starts for sure in all organizations. And I think one of the other tips that's really, I think, important to consider as we're having this conversation about volunteerism is why. Why as an organization are you engaging in volunteerism? How does it relate to your goals as an organization? So obviously talking to your people is important, but understanding as an organization, who are we, what is our purpose as an organization, and how does that connect to the causes that we care about? So that's where I always start.
I love it. I love it. And I'm glad you brought up that why, because I think that's always, like you said, it's such an important piece. Like those first two things you got to do for basically any people thing that you're going to be doing is like talk to the actual people and then state why you want to do this. I think so often we rush to do things without really thinking about the why behind it. And so we do things and they don't always succeed in the way that we hoped that they did because we didn't clarify that why first. So I'd love to hear your perspective on like what tips can you give teams or companies on connecting that why and figuring out why they want to have a virtual volunteerism thing or why they want to be building volunteerism into their, into their culture? Like why should we be doing this? Why is it important to have volunteerism in our workplace nowadays?
Yeah, I think, and certainly the space that I come from, I'm particularly hot on skills-based volunteerism. And I think a lot of organizations are, not only because statistically it shows to improve recruitment and retention and engagement and all of those things, but at the end of the day, when you can really better understand the people on your team and the skills that they have, that benefits your whole organization. And it's a real opportunity to connect people on the interests they have internally prior to the discovery of how that relates to the outside world. So again, why I always say involve your people, start with your people, host a session where you can all talk about why would we do this as an organization, whatever our, CSR goals happen to be. If you're, a large company, I love to talk about this from the perspective of smaller organizations and particularly startups, because it's even more challenging in many ways to institute programmatic volunteerism, as it were, when you're a small organization. But it's even easier to talk to your people. It's even easier to brainstorm around this and really start asking those questions. So again, starting with why is about why are we interested in volunteering? What causes are out there that are aligned with our company mission? So what do our people, what are they interested in? Are they volunteering at the SPCA? It's pretty hard to get together and walk dogs in a remote world. And so what are the other opportunities and alternatives that are out there that are virtual? And then I always ask the other question of what has worked in the past as individuals and as a company. What have we done that has actually been effective, big or small? And that can be anything from, the kinds of, acts of kindness that we do in our own neighborhoods, helping a neighbor or volunteering at an elderly care facility down the street, which is dangerous times right now. Elderly care facilities are not bringing people in. So really digging in with your people and having a meaningful conversation about what has worked as an organization, but even more importantly, as individual humans. What have you done that's engaged you? Why has it been engaging? What has been interesting about it? What felt rewarding about it? Why was it difficult or challenging because of location or time? Just really digging in and having those conversations as a team really helps to sort of surface the causes that people care about, the things that are actually engaging to the individuals on your team, and starts to spark real conversation around what your individual team members may never have thought of as volunteering. Like some people have a very, very clear idea in their head of what they think volunteerism can look like. And it's hard to get outside that box in this virtual world without having conversations about what else this could look like.
I love that you touched on that because, we all do. When I think of volunteerism, my first thing is like, I'm going out and I'm doing something probably for a nonprofit. And like I signed up, I contacted somebody and I scheduled time for me to go do something like a beach cleanup or pulling invasive species or volunteering at a food bank or something like that, where it's very like, it's like a job. You show up, you do your work and you leave. When in reality, volunteerism is so much more than that. And I think that's kind of why I'm very excited to talk to you about this, is you have this framework and these ideas on how to engage people in so many more meaningful ways when it comes to volunteerism, outside of like the quote unquote normal ways that we used to do it in the past, where it was like, okay, people team, let's send out a forum, see who wants to go down to the food bank or the shelter and serve food this morning. And a group of us will go and do that. And now we can't do that anymore. So what's left? And so I think I would love to like, how do you start that transition from other than talking to your team and showing them what is volunteerism, how as a company do you transition away from that traditional volunteer model?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think there are lots of tools and services and consultants and people out there that can support teams through this. And if you know me, you know I've been in startup in for a long time in a variety of different ways. So I'm all about being resourceful. What can I do with no money? That's always where I start. What can I do with no money and no resources? Regardless of the size of my company and the resources I may have, what's the low-hanging fruit here? Where do I start? And I love what's out there and available through actually looking at businesses that are the same size as your organization or in the same industry. Get out your old friend Google and start looking at what other people are doing. Google your competitors plus volunteerism. Google what people in the size of company that you're in and potentially competitors in your industry, but also outside of that, like what are these really interesting, what are people doing in social impact spaces around volunteerism, and really use the tools that you have, like the Google, that are free and easy, and start looking at what other people are doing, because there's so many fascinating ways to approach volunteerism. And then, challenge your people to also do the same, bring ideas to the table, come together for a collaborative conversation, get out your Miro board or whatever collaborative tools you use and see what people find out there in their travels, and then start talking about some of those really interesting possibilities that are out there. I myself have done this many times in many ways. In addition to talking to organizations of all sizes, I've done some homework and looked at what other people are doing. And it is like there are countless opportunities to participate that are virtual. And again, one of the things that I keep coming back to, and I will harp on to the end of time, is that skills-based component. What skills do we have? And not just our job skills, what skills do we all have as individuals that we want to share? Because that's the most meaningful place to start. The reason that people are so hot on skills-based volunteerism is because it really does meaningfully engage people to share the gifts and the talents that they already have. And it's really easy to do. And as much as, I enjoy a beach cleanup or, serving soup down at the soup kitchen, in a virtual world, that doesn't involve everybody, and it doesn't necessarily interest everybody either. So this is where I love tools like mentorship. So as you know, our company Inqli focuses on using mentorship as skills-based volunteerism, because sharing the knowledge and skills I already have online with students and people in the workforce that are interested in getting into my field or interested in my career. There are lots of organizations in which you can do this with. And there are also not-for-profits where you can connect to not-for-profits in your own backyard that serve students or the elderly or transitioning workforces or immigrants and refugee organizations that are having trouble building networks and getting into the workforce. There's platforms out there that you can use to conduct informational interviews, and you can do that with people in your industry and connect them to refugees and immigrants that are just coming to our country and trying to build their networks and build their volunteerism themselves. You can connect to these organizations. And I'd say as a starting point, once you've figured out the organizations that your organization wants to align with and wants to support, talking to them in the same way that you brainstorm and collaborate with your people, then bringing in an organization that you might want to work with and conducting that same kind of brainstorming around what do they actually need in this new remote world, instead of making assumptions about what our charitable organizations need. Getting into those conversations, asking those same questions in this new world that we're all living in. What do you actually need?
Yeah, I think it's true. Like we all make so many assumptions of like, again, it goes back to the traditional volunteer methodology of like, I'm going to go down and do something. I'm going to clean something. I'm going to serve something. I'm going to do something. I think we all forget that we have this skill set, like you said, skill-based volunteerism, where we have these skills either that we've honed as professionals or through our hobbies or through our interests that are very meaningful to a lot of organizations who need that help. And I think this like what you just said kind of plays on one of the questions that we got from Tiffany, which is we have partnerships with many organizations. How should we approach virtual volunteerism with them? And I think one of the things you just touched on was like, bring them in for the conversation, but how else should you be approaching your partner organizations that you maybe had that traditional model with in the past? How do you bring them into this virtual world with you?
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot of creative ways to do that. And I think depending on the organization and those partnerships that you have, sometimes it's also worthwhile to connect. Again, what I love about the virtual world is connecting our organizations with not-for-profits and potentially other not-for-profits. So as an example, I was working with an organization that supports multiple not-for-profits, and their focus is youth and animals. Those are the two things. So they do a lot of work with conservation, and they do a lot of work with youth. Bring both of those organizations into the conversation. Host an event as the host organization where you can get on, just like we are today, online together, and ask those questions and ask where these two organizations might be able to support each other. So as an example, conservation efforts where you can actually involve youth in organizations, or a big brothers, big sisters kind of opportunity where you can connect the two organizations, where your organization might participate virtually in a big brother, big sister or mentorship kind of dynamic. And we may also do something online to support conservation efforts. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a really cool online, it's called Missing Maps, where you can go and help map remote communities so that they can get support during challenging times. And there's all sorts of organizations that are missing, like literally missing from maps. And so when relief efforts happen, they're difficult to find. So you can get together with youth and actually do this online. They have a whole program that you can follow online to be able to, so you as an organization could connect with these youth that you're working with one organization, and then go and do this missing maps activity together that supports another organization. So to get creative, you could bring multiple organizations together into the conversation, do some homework first, put out some opportunities like missing maps as an example. And there's many of them. I can even provide people with a list after this, and share some of those kinds of opportunities that are out there. But I'm just really encouraging people to get creative, because even the very act itself of hosting an online event to connect these two organizations can be really valuable, because perhaps this youth organization and this conservation organization didn't even know each other existed. And you can be the catalyst to bring those people together and find new ways for them to get support for their volunteerism programs in really meaningful ways.
I love it. That's great. And I love the talking a lot about like creativity, flexibility, thinking outside the box. I think that's just the name of the game now, that we're all in this sort of remote, hybrid, virtual, online, whatever you want to call it, world. And I think really trying to push past that traditional volunteer idea. One thing I'd love to learn about is it's like, how do you and this is for any type of people thing, how do you get the executive team on board? How do you make them see that, because you don't get necessarily the photo ops that you used to get, because you don't have a big group of people with garbage bags or doing whatever. It's all online now. And so it's just faces on a screen. So how do you convince the executive team that it's still worth the time, it's still worth the money, it's still worth the effort to do this? And we talked a little bit about this, but I want to dig a little bit more into that, retention, engagement, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we're writing a white paper on the subject as we speak. Because there is a lot of reasons why your leadership and team should be on board with this. And at the end of the day, all the data, and this is what we intend to share in this white paper, all the data points to the fact that as an organization, if you're not meaningfully engaging your people in purpose beyond, their day-to-day jobs, the things that they care about, the things that you collectively care about as an organization, you're going to be losing a lot of key stakeholders in the near future. And this next generation of our workforce, millennials, Gen Z, you've heard it over and over again. It's the truth. They're changing the game, and they will be, millennials in particular, will be 75% of our workforce by 2025. And these generations of people are really looking for meaning at work, and not only, that lip service kind of meaning that I think a lot of organizations have been used to, but they're paying attention, and they will find out if you are actually telling the truth as an organization about what it means to engage in purpose and meaning beyond, your corporate strategy. And so much so that the expectation is now that that is at the core of your strategy. How are you making the world a better place? How are you engaging your people? And there is a ton of data that points to the fact that the game has changed here, and the stakes are much higher. And so recruitment, talent, recruitment and retention, these are real. There's a lot of real data out there that points to the fact that in this war for talent, as we're calling it in the corporate world, it's not a war, actually. It's very much about meaning, about purpose. How do you engage folks in that? And so once our white paper is done, I'd be happy to share it with you so that you can share it with senior leadership and get them on board.
That's awesome. I'm so excited.
But you can absolutely do some Googling and find all of these stats yourself and
cool. I mean, that's
Sorry,
amazing.
I'm probably getting a delay.
Okay, it's amazing to see that you're already collecting the data. You already know what's happening. You got the white paper coming out. And I agree. And so much of this is around reframing the conversation of what used to work doesn't work anymore. And that has been in this point in history has not been so true as it is now. And I think that it kind of spans the whole people function. And you're seeing this with a huge increase of people leader roles opening up across organizations. But what I'd love to hear is how do you start? You talked a little bit about talking to the people, figuring out the why, and then getting really creative. What are some really tangible things that you've seen other companies have success in? Because I know you work with a lot of companies, you've seen this before. What's a really actionable thing that they did that created a lot of success, that their teams really got on board with, that showcase the success? Because sometimes when you come talk to those executives, they want a proof of concept. They're okay, we'll try this, but if we don't see success when we see it once, we're not doing it again. So how do you make sure that success level is as high as can be?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think I always sort of break it down into the 5 points, and we've already covered a couple of them, which is really that, yes, talk to your goals, define your mission and goals, steal like an artist, look at what's going on out there and use the ideas that other people are using. But communication is absolutely critical. What is your communication strategy with your people internally? What is the communication strategy with the partner? And not just before and during the volunteerism opportunities, but how are we reporting on that? What stories are we telling to engage people in further activity and working within these projects that you've rolled out and reporting on that? How are we measuring success? Having those conversations with your people, not just at the senior leadership level where we're saying, okay, success looks like this and outcomes will look like this, and we want this many people engaged and this many volunteerism hours and all those things. There's nothing wrong with that, but engaging your people and the charitable partners in the conversation and the measurement of what does success look like and what stories do we want to tell about this success when we achieve it. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with, as a brand, using those opportunities as a way to create brand awareness and have people fall in love with your brand, because you're doing good things out there in the world. So share those stories and share that PR meaningfully with these charities that you're supporting and organizations that you're supporting, because they need it too. They need that juice. They need the PR even more than you do. So in advance, discuss what does success look like and what stories will we tell about that success collectively, because it's not just about our success as a company, it's the success for the organizations that you're supporting, and telling those stories in really meaningful ways not only, shines a really positive light on your brand, it's also an opportunity to connect with future recruits, other stakeholders and customers out there in the world. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with getting some good brand cred for the work that you're doing out there in the community. And the only way to do that is through meaningful storytelling. So plan that in advance, talk about that in advance with your partners, and really engage all the stakeholders in what does storytelling about our success look like? Because it's ultimately about bringing more people along to say, yeah, let's do more of that. Let's do that again. Let's do it bigger. Let's do it better. And there's nothing wrong with telling those stories in meaningful ways that help shine a light on the work that you're doing and why it matters.
I love it. I love it. I'm glad that you touched on that storytelling piece of like not only measuring all the success and talking about that internally. I mean, like pushing it up to the executive team and saying, hey, this worked. Like, look how engaged our employees are. They really like this. We should do this again. But then amplifying that out, because it's not, like you said, it's not just about us as an organization. It's also about the people that we're partnering with and giving them some of that extra extra visibility and making sure that they have a story to tell as well. I love it. It's great. And when you do that, or when you've seen companies do that, who are the general people that they're getting involved in the team? Like the first ones that come to my head are like, you've got your people team, maybe somebody from marketing joins in on that kind of conversation because they're the creatives in our teams. But like, who else are you getting involved? Like, who are these stakeholders that are usually the ones that you're talking to? Who should we be contacting? Who should we be looping into these conversations?
Yeah, so I think internally, absolutely, depending on the org and the size of your company, employee resource groups are an awesome place to start as well to, really involve all people in the organization and diverse perspectives on, what opportunities you're choosing, why you're choosing them, really getting feedback from people. I think one of the things that we've historically done with volunteerism opportunities is they haven't necessarily been accessible to all people. So I think that's one of the really important opportunities we have here with virtual volunteerism. It isn't just about, we used to do it this way and now we have to do it like this. I think virtual volunteerism has always been an incredible opportunity to create that kind of accessibility for people with varied abilities, people in remote locations. There's lots of reasons why other people, I think historically it's only been 30% of organizations at max that actually participate in volunteerism programs. And in many ways, that's because without the virtual component, they haven't been as accessible to everyone in the organization, and they haven't necessarily been accessible to all the diverse stakeholders that could be participating. So it's an incredible way to, as an example, I work a lot in the education world. So working with post-secondary institutions, they need to engage alumni. That's who is ultimately funding a lot of these post-secondary institutions, and they need meaningful ways to engage with alumni. Well, what an awesome opportunity to not only involve your students in volunteerism, but bring your staff and alumni and really bring people together around volunteerism initiatives that support all the organizations. So I think being creative as well about who's at the table and inviting people who historically haven't been at the table when it comes to making these decisions about volunteerism is really critical. So I think taking a good look at your organization and asking the question, who hasn't been at the table, who might want to be at the table, and who have we not even necessarily considered should be at the table, and inviting them too, because that's where the real creativity and diversity comes from, is when we consider who's not at the table.
I love it. That's awesome. And like, I think you touched on something really that's really a big topic right now, which is like the diversity, equity, inclusion, and bringing in people who have historically kind of been left out of the conversation. And so sometimes that trust is a little bit frayed within organizations. And like, there's those groups who, they're at work, but they may not trust the leadership or trust that they will make good on these promises. And so any ideas on engaging those people who might be, they haven't been engaged in the past, or they might not want to because they might not feel safe and secure because they haven't been engaged historically. Any tips or any strategies or anything that you can share that would sort of help breach those gaps and maybe facilitate a little bit of a rebuilding of that relationship?
Yeah, it's an awesome question, a very, very valid one, and one of my favorite topics actually, because the importance in involving people who have not historically been involved in these conversations is acknowledging that. coming to the table and saying, hey, this isn't tokenism. I'm coming to, I'm asking this question of whether it's an employee resource group or external stakeholder, coming and openly saying, I know we haven't involved you in this conversation in the past. We want to involve you in this conversation. We want to hear your feedback. And we'd like to know where you'd like to start in that conversation. So coming open to the possibility that how you think this should go might not be how everyone else thinks this should go. So just being vulnerable to acknowledging that other people have historically not been included in these conversations. We are trying to do better, and asking the question, who else should be in this conversation from your perspective, whichever group A, B, C that you might be talking to. Who else are we not thinking about that should be at this table? What else might we not be considering? And start there. Start with the vulnerability of, we don't have all the answers. We don't necessarily have all the solutions to what DEI actually looks like, what equity in our organizations looks like. And the best place to start is admitting that you don't always know where to start, and that you're looking for their feedback, and then listen, because you can't say that and then not listen. So when people, really do open up and share with you, some possibilities that maybe you hadn't considered, make sure that you really do consider those. It's not that you have to take every piece of advice or every route that gets put in front of you, but you really do have to listen and consider, and really have open dialogue about the fact that, not everybody's been included in these conversations, and we're trying to do better.
I love it. That's awesome. And I think like another piece of that is like, once you listen to them and you've got all this great feedback, don't ask them to do the work. It's now on you as the person asking for all this direction and feedback to then go do the work, because there's nothing worse than going to your ERGs and being like, hey, I want to know where we can do better. Great. Can you go do that now?
Yeah, exactly. Now that you've given me all this great insight, now here's a whole bunch more work for you. No. Yeah. Great point. And thank you for pointing that one out, Noah.
Yeah. I think like kind of leading into this, and I think this is great. Another question from Tiffany was like, holding leadership accountable in volunteerism. How do we make sure that the executive team is participating and, they're not just talking about it, but they're actually walking the walk and doing it and leading by example and doing all the things that need to happen for this to actually be an effective program at any company, of no matter what size it is.
Yeah, I think, well, you're speaking to exactly why we are putting a lot of time and effort into bringing all this data together, is to really show senior leadership in organizations how important this is for everyone to participate in. And so one of the things that I think historically has happened around skills-based volunteerism is that we've only considered top level leadership skills valuable. So a lot of these sort of pro bono activities that we've participated in the past, getting involved with not-for-profit organizations and coming in and doing some like pro bono consulting or service work or whatever it may be with these organizations, is often only involving senior level leaders. And then we have like these different programs for everyone else. So I think it's really important that we are looking at the opportunities for particularly that skills-based. Everyone has skills, everyone has talents to bring to the table, and people out there in the real world aren't just looking for the skills of senior leadership. So I think it's really important. I think when you're talking to senior leadership and trying to sort of persuade people that this is important, the data is really important to show people. And the data shows how valuable this is. So if you're a CEO who's awake at night, worried about being able to attract the talent you need to execute on your mission and vision in the world, then you need to care about this, because you will not be able to attract that talent. So I think getting leadership on board is really about presenting the facts and figures and saying, this is why this should matter to you. And if it doesn't, then you're saying it doesn't matter to you to attract top talent and nurture people's strengths and leadership skills. Like, there are so many layers of why the value is there. from a business case. And when you can present that really effectively, which I'm going to help you do with this white paper, but until then, this data is out there, and you can really present a meaningful case that says this not only matters to the bottom line, and it does, but it really matters to your people to be engaged in meaningful ways, and not just having volunteerism or CSR initiatives that are decided by someone up here and now we're all expected to kind of participate. And that's why they historically haven't been as successful as they could be, is because we're really not involving our people in the conversation.
I love it. And so the other piece of that is I think is setting expectations, because something like this takes a while to bear fruit. It's not we're going to implement in Q1 and we're going to see results Q2, and our talent pipeline is going to be fixed and our retention rates are going to be fixed. So how do you set expectations with the leadership team of this is a long-term play? If we're going down this route, this is 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, this is becomes part of our culture as a company. Sometimes that's not something they want to hear. They want to hear about what can we do now to fix things now? How do you have that conversation of no, you can't fix this now. It needs to take years to do it.
Yeah, totally. I always relate this back. I find that the relationship comparison is really important for people, that things like this, changes in culture and focus on people, is no different than your relationships in your life. So think of the last time that you broke trust in a relationship in your life. Did that get fixed overnight? Did you turn around and just go, you know what, I'm really sorry I broke trust with you, let's just move on, and then everything was fine? No, it doesn't work that way. And so in the same vein, when we're dealing with anything with people, I think it's really important that we are making a commitment to the longer game here. This is building trust and building connection and building relationships internally as well as externally with the causes that we support takes time, and the benefits of that are immediate in the sense that people start to meaningfully engage when you actually do engage them and come with curiosity and questions and really want to understand your people and the partners that you're supporting. It starts there. And so you start to see relationship shifting in general when you come to the conversation from a place of curiosity, when you're not directing top down, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it, but instead come to the table really looking to involve your people in the conversation. Those changes do start to happen quickly if you follow through. And I would also say that if you're a large organization, investing in this, investing in the platforms, the tools, the measurement, the reporting, all of that is going to make a huge difference. And if you're a smaller organization that can't necessarily afford those tools, one of my favorite statements, you can probably see the book on my shelf behind me. I love the book Steal Like an Artist, and I love the statement Steal Like an Artist. A lot of these companies that maybe if you're not at the level where you can afford, Benevity or Your Cause or Alea or Realized Worth or some of these organizations that are consultants and CSR platforms and those kinds of tools, they provide a ton of free resources and tools you can use online around the DIY of your own measurement and how you might approach programs like these. Go and steal those tools. They are there for the taking. They are free. And there's some really useful resources out there from people who are experienced and have done this before. So there's a lot of tools out there that you can really use to learn from what those have gone before you that are maybe in larger companies, but that you can use those tools for free and learn as you go and really track your progress and measure the results. And there's really meaningful ways to do that, and a lot of them are not costly. So I would strongly recommend go looking at some of the tools that those companies are already providing online for free.
Awesome, great. And I think you're right. It's every startup, every small organization, you got to be crafty, you got to be scrappy, you got to find those free things or those cheap things and make them your own and just learn and talk to people. I feel like there's this question that I'm thinking of that I think it feels like it comes up with almost any type of people initiative, is that there's always going to be people in the organization who don't participate. And is that necessarily a bad thing when it comes to volunteerism? How do you address that? Because I find that that's often a question that comes from leadership of like, why aren't this 10% of people participating? Why can't we get 100% participation? Or why can't we get it up? Because there's almost always a group of people who are like, for whatever reason, either they're not interested or their lives are just too busy and they can't do it. How do you broach that conversation of like just letting people know that it's okay not to participate if they don't have the bandwidth or they don't have the interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, you cut out there for a minute. So I think your question was that how do you address the fact that not everybody wants to participate in volunteerism and not everybody may have the time and space to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right? Yeah. I think that's really important because again, so I was a single mom for many, many, many years, and volunteerism took us. I was volunteering every day in my own life for not much thanks, and so I get that different people at different times in their lives have. And again, this is part of why Inqli exists in the world, is we really believe that the opportunities out there that are available are often really time consuming for people. So one of the things we do on Inqli's platform as well is provide what we call micro volunteerism. You can spend 10 minutes at a time, helping a young person, helping somebody in their career, giving them advice, and doing that incrementally when and where you have time. So there are tools like Inqli and others that really do provide what we call micro volunteerism, where there's opportunities that take very, very little of people's time. So specifically when you're out there Googling, check out micro volunteerism opportunities, check out skills-based and virtual opportunities specifically, because there are a lot of opportunities that don't take a ton of time. And I think it's really important to communicate to people, we get it. Everybody has varied level, and there's definitely the super volunteers out there who are, and I have friends who are super volunteers, and I talk to people all the time. I am not a super volunteer. I'm a startup. I'm a parent. I have very limited time, but I still want to give back and I want to contribute. So making those kinds of opportunities available where people can, give small doses of their time and energy is really, really important. And then also making it clear that we get it. Not everybody can participate in everything, and that is totally okay. And creating that safety within your team that is an understanding that people are at different places at different times. So keep that in mind when you're designing your programs and when you're talking to your teams. What kind of time does your team have? Are you a team that works like crazy and has really long, busy schedules? You should reconsider that anyway for other reasons. I won't get into that. And so what does that look like in reality for your team, and designing your programs around that kind of flexibility, depending on who your people are, what kind of time they have.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, a startup that is predominantly staffed with, people in their early 20s who don't have those other commitments, who are gung-ho to do a bunch of different stuff, versus the company where it's a lot of families or people who are just starting their families, or people who are a little bit older and closer to retirement. And like I like to talk about like flexibility, making sure that the program works for the dynamics of your company and the makeup of your teams, because every company and every team is going to be very different. And like you said, some companies are going to have more millennials working for their companies. Some companies are going to have less millennials and more of a broad range of age groups that are working for their companies, and figuring out what each sort of group wants to be doing for them that's meaningful for them. Did I come through? Did I glitch out a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit, but I caught most of it. I'm sure I'm glitching out too, so I apologize to anyone who's getting like weird robot version of me.
You're coming through clear for me, so maybe it's just on my end that it's things that are glitching out. I think like we're coming close to that. Like we've only got about 10 minutes left, and so I want to what did I miss, Rebecca? What didn't I ask that people need to know about virtual volunteerism and how you can do it, and the tips and tricks and all those good things to just get started or to look into? Like what did I miss? Because I'm sure I missed something.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say that, and I don't think we missed it, but I think I want to stress the importance of it, is that If we look at virtual volunteerism as this thing that we have to do because we can't do in-person volunteerism, we're missing the huge opportunity that virtual volunteerism actually is. And so in a world where we can be in person together all the time, that's awesome. But there's some real benefits to virtual volunteerism that I think are really important to note, including, especially for smaller organizations, it's less costly. It costs less to bring people together virtually. And if you use the right tools and platforms, and there's lots of them out there now, that can be a much easier thing and a much less costly thing to do. And without geographic restrictions, it's easier to bring all people together and give all people the opportunity to participate. And there's lots of benefits to virtual volunteerism that are not benefits of regular old volunteerism that we're used to. And so don't look at it as this subpar version of volunteerism. Look at it as a new opportunity to do things differently, that it can involve more people, and essentially get more bang for our buck in a virtual world, because we're able to access more people and also potentially support organizations that we haven't thought of supporting in the past because they're across the globe or they're not in our own backyard. And so there's many more opportunities to engage with different types of organizations that we may never have thought of engaging with because they aren't in our backyard. And I just think there's such an opportunity here for us all to get really creative and to think of this as a positive rather than this sort of not as awesome version of volunteering, when I think it can be even more awesome.
I love it. And I think that's a theme that a lot of people are seeing when it comes to just being remote and hybrid. It's don't lament what's no longer there. It's embrace what is possible. And I've talked to a lot of people who have decided to go remote or hybrid first, who are in office companies. And they're like, we really had to really be like, we're not going to lament what was lost in the office culture. We're going to just talk about all the great things that have come with remote work.
Totally. Right. And I think that, that is such a mindset shift that I think is so important in this conversation, whether we're talking remote work or virtual volunteerism or any components of remote work. It's the reality of the time that we're living in. So let's look at the bright side of that and find ways to, make it really meaningful. And anybody who wants to connect with me, like the things I've found in my travels that are amazing. And I'll give you one example before we run out of time, because I just think it's such an awesome one, is an organization. I'm trying to remember the name of it, the Trevor Project. If anybody's ever heard of this, it's an organization that supports LGBTQ plus youth who are struggling with issues like coming out and LGBTQ identity and depression. And it's actually quite an involved volunteerism program in that they do like a 40-hour like online training as a part of this volunteerism. But I worked with a particular organization that had a lot of diversity in LGBTQ staff and a focus in their brand. And so it was an incredible match of these two organizations where there were a lot of experienced people that had experienced what these youth are dealing with. And they all went through this training program and worked with these youth. And it was incredibly rewarding for all of the people involved. So don't hesitate to also look for opportunities that are really specific to your brand and your people and your culture, because in this virtual world, the Trevor Project maybe isn't in your backyard, but through the beauty of virtual volunteerism, we now have a lot more of these kinds of opportunities to get really discerning about the kinds of programs and the kinds of causes that we want to support that are actually even more aligned with our brand than something we could find in our backyard.
Well, I love it. And that's great. And I think, there's just so much opportunity, almost too much, because it's almost hard to know where to start. But we're always bringing it back to that why, to your mission, to your vision. It's like, that's always the starting point. Why are we doing this? How does this relate back to our mission? How does this relate back to us as an organization? I just want to say thank you, Rebecca. That was awesome. I really appreciate all the insight. I hope our audience got a lot of insight from that. We did have one question from Cynthia, who's asking if you offer mentoring services. So
That's awesome. Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah. Connect with me directly. Anyone who is interested in learning more or talking more. As you can tell, I love to talk about this subject and I'm excited about it and the possibilities of it. So by all means, connect with me and I'd be happy to share more information directly with you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.